Take number 52. Right, so today I'm going to be talking about variable scope. We have three different scopes that I'm going to talk about. We have local, instance, and global. I'll also talk about some exceptions to the rule at the end, because that kind of stuff isn't readily apparent. Even if you've read the manual, you can forget things like I did. So anyway, here we are. We have an object called local variables, and in the create event we have a variable called name, and we're going to set it to Bobby, and we're making it a local variable because we're putting var at the start of it. What this means is we can only access or read this variable within the same event. So if I copy this debug message and put it here, then let me just comment this out. Let's just run the game, and in the output down here we'll see Bobby there, because in the create event this ran one time. If we delete this and we try to run the same code, same message in the step event, we're going to get a crash like so. It says obj local variables.name not set before reading it. Why is that? Because this is a local variable. We can only access it within the create event. Okay, so what happens if we take out the var and we just make it what I call an instance variable? You see the color changes from green to orange just because of the way I have my color set up. So I know that this is now an instance variable. If I run the game again, we're going to get a string of Bobbies like so, and no crash. That's just because I changed it from a local to an instance variable. So you might think, well, what's the point of ever using VAR? You don't have to use it at all, really. The benefit of using VAR, first of all, you can use the same variable name in different events as long as you make them locals, and they won't affect each other. That's why you always see people using VAR within a for loop. It's probably because of they don't want to use that variable outside of that loop or that event. Also, local variables save on memory usage. So if you have a really big game, lots of variables, that could be something to look at. But the kind of games that I see most people make, including myself, doesn't make a big difference from what I can tell. So what happens if we make this a global? So global.name equals Bobby. Is this going to work? This is just an instance variable, not a global. No, it says obj local variables.name not set before reading it. This is because the instance variable name is not the same as global.name. So you can have variables that are very similar in naming, just one without the global dot and one with it. I wouldn't really recommend that though, because you're probably going to confuse yourself. You can access global variables from anywhere else in the game as long as you initialized the global in the first place. So for example, if I go into rm local and let's just make another object, global test, and let's copy the code for the show debug. So if we now run the game, we're going to try and access the global variable from a different instance, and it's going to run perfectly. What happens if we don't have the initializing instance in the room? We're going to get a crash. Like so. So you have to initialize globals. If you're aware of macros, then you don't have to initialize them. For example, if we do macro name Bobby. Anyway, so we've got a macro called name, and it's storing the word Bobby or the string Bobby in the create event of obj local variables, and we're going to try and read that in the step event of a different object. And we are not even going to put the initial object, the one that sets up the macro, we're not even going to put it inside the room. And we're going to run the game, and we should see a string of Bobbies in the output again, like so. So with macros, you don't even need to put the object in the room. As long as you have it somewhere in the create event of an object, then you're good to go. What about if we wanted to access another instance's variables, the ones that I call instance variables? Okay, so what I've done is I've gone ahead and just created a completely blank object called obj_stat, with the exception of in the end step, I'm trying to show a message displaying its stat. Let me just show you what happens if we're going to do it incorrectly. If I place an instance of obj_stat in the room, we are going to get a crash because we never initialized stat in the first place. obj_stat.stat not set before reading it. Okay, so if we delete this object and we put this one in here, global test, and in the step event, what we're going to do, we're going to check to see if an instance exists of obj_stat. If it doesn't, we're going to create one. We are going to store the ID of the instance we just created inside stat object or obj, and then we're going to tell this instance we created, we're going to tell it that its stat variable equals 10. So we're going to be creating a variable from a different object into this new instance. So if we now run the game, you can see stat 10, because this message is running. Okay, so what happens if we say stat equals 10, and we're going to put an instance of this inside the room, and we're going to hide this for now. But what we're going to do is in the step event of this object, we're going to do show debug, and then we're going to say obj_stat.stat. I wouldn't ever use an object name to access an instance normally. This is just for demonstration purposes because we only have one instance of obj_stat, so it's going to give us the right one. Anyway, let's go on with this. So now we are going to be grabbing the instance variable from this instance, and we're going to display it from a different instance. Let's run the game. So there we can see stat 10 again. What happens if we change stat into a local variable? Let's run the game. We're going to get a crash because it's local. You can't read local variables from a different instance unless, so this is the exception to the rule. Okay, so inside the room we just have the one object. It's obj global test, and inside obj stat, the create event doesn't have anything. Let's delete it. And in the end step, we are trying to display stat. We have not yet created this variable. So what we're going to do is in the step event of global test, we're going to check to see if an instance exists of obj stat. If not, we're going to create it. We're going to create a local variable inside global test. We're going to call it money, and we're going to set it to 55. Then we are going to access the stat object that we just created and tell it that its variable stat is equal to money. So we're going to be reading the local variable, and this is going to work. So we should see stat equals 55 in the output, like so. Does this mean we can read money from stat? Well, let's find out, shall we? The answer is no, because we can't access another object's local variables. We can only do that in this specific case with a with statement. Okay, so that's it. I hope you found this interesting, informative, but I will catch you next time. Bye for now.